Right now, it's just, this is all I remember. So fancy sweatshirts.
All right, hey everyone, we're gonna get started now. I'm actually gonna move this bench.
Hey, good to bench. Cool.
Just 'cause I'm gonna be staying in the room.
Oh, you don't want us to stay right here?
No. All right, cool. Thanks everyone for coming out. I guess this is the first shell talk of the semester and with the new batch, so welcome everyone. So shell talks are kind of our chance to have Startup Shell members teach everyone about the stuff that they're really good at, and that's why we're all here. So today I'm going to be talking about commanding space and layout design. I'm Jeff, by the way, for those who don't know me.
Hi, Jeff.
I like to do a lot of design stuff, and we'll be talking about that today. So, a lot of design talks are about content. It's about how you position your words and your elements, the elements that have volume or have area. It's about typography and about logos and things like that, or about how you position your nav and the elements within it. But this talk is about the stuff that surrounds content. It's about all the space. When you're doing design, it's super, super important to know about all that content that you're managing, but it's often neglected the way you use space and the things that create that order between all the content. So yeah, this talk is called Commanding Space. How you use that space to your advantage, and how you think consciously about using it in your designs, aka that good layout design shit. All right. So again, this is about the interaction between space and content. I won't talk about content at all, but if there are things you do want to talk about, let me know because they're super interrelated. It's not like you can be you can have a good design by just thinking about space. It's really interaction between the two of them. So the first thing we'll talk about is padding and margins. Padding is, if you have a container, a square, let's say, padding is the area, the space that pushes things in, that is interior to the container, and margins are the things outside. So the way you use these are really essential for any sort of positioning or layout. In this example, we have some text in a box, right? And it doesn't really use padding very well. It's pretty straightforward. When you use padding, you're able to create space within that and create forms out of the content inside. And by the way, the way this talk is going to be organized, I'm going to go through some pretty obvious things, and then we'll talk about some of the psychology behind that and like why it's really important to think about these things. But hopefully we can chug through some of the things that you look at designs and you're able to say, oh, that's good. It just it has it. Why don't my designs have it? These are a lot of the things to talk about. And yeah, we're using Arrested Development Ipsum, so that's fun. What's really cool is that if you have a good grasp of space and padding and margins and how to use them correctly, we're able to create a form here that allows us to read this text without really any content surrounding it. A lot of times people feel the need to use borders and backgrounds and boxes and things like that to organize their content, when really sometimes the content, the way it forms itself, manipulates the space around it, is able to create those forms that allow people to really understand that, allow you to communicate your content to people. So in this case, it's not necessarily about the words on the screen and the way they're positioned. They're not even totally aligned. It's really about the space around it that creates that form. So in terms of using padding and margins, hierarchy is super, super important. The hierarchy pretty much says this is important, this is less important, this is less important. And hopefully, as a designer, people are reading all the stuff you're putting out there, whether it's a website or an app or what have you. But hierarchy allows you to browse the page visually and see the most important things. So this part is about how to use space to establish hierarchy. So this is an example, sorry it's kind of small, but this is on our new Bitcamp website. And as you scroll down the page, you see this about header, which again is small. But it's small. It's the smallest text on the entire page, but because of the space around it, it creates that visual hierarchy. It says that this is the header of our content without even being bigger than the other stuff or flashier or whatever. This is an example where using space, and commanding like what its position among the other elements, it allows you to understand that it is, yes, more important. It's higher visually. So our actually, the heading styles as you go through this website, there's like the H1, H2, etc. The H2 on this website is smaller than all the other stuff. And it's because of the space around it. If we hadn't manipulated it correctly, it wouldn't appear to be any more important than anything else. This is some like stupid viral image that goes around, that like BuzzFeed will like throw at you and say like, oh my gosh, wow, see how easy it is to just focus on the sentence. That's why. You're using padding and margins correctly to allow you to focus on content and push attention towards that content with just using space correctly. So grouping and separation. This is the most fun part. If you're a budding designer or an experienced designer or whatever, this is kind of what I think you should be thinking about objectively to make your designs better. Grouping and separation. So one way to think about as you're going through your layout design is how are things grouped, how are things separated? What are the relationships between these? It's kind of like watching the OC, or any soap opera for that matter. As you're watching these TV shows, you're thinking about, oh, is he seeing them? Is he related to this person? Is she into him? And it's kind of the same thing. You're thinking about how are these things related? How are they grouped, either visually or by content or by the space around them, by the color, by their position, etc. How are they separated? So when you're designing, it's kind of fun to think of it as like seeing the independent relationships between things. And in a second, we'll go over a list of exactly the formulas to look at for how that grouping and separation happens. It's not something that you're given when watching a TV show. But here's a quick example. So if I have a navigation menu here, I've got a logo. This is actually an exercise I did with Nick Alexander. He's working on the UNVIO website. And so this is an exercise we did to help us design. So if we have a logo here, on our website, we have our content. This was nav 1, nav 2, nav 3. Then we have a sub-navigation menu over here. This was, let's say, about, and option 1, option 2. Then we have under here a lot of text, and we'll stop at that. So on this website, we're able to look at it and think about what is grouped and what is separated. Why is it done that? So why did someone call it out? What is something that should be grouped together?
Navigation.
Navigation, awesome. So this is one. This is one group. What else? What else goes together? Sub-navigation, right? So this is all one group. We also have things that we want to associate as different sections, like the header and the content is one thing. The logo and the navigation is another thing. And as you continue to go through this website, you're able to see like a sort of nested structure of how things are separated. And the first thing we're going to talk about with this is how to use the actual positioning of these elements to separate it. Nick, we're talking about the UNVIO example. Awesome. Perfect. So as we go through this, you're able to see, wait a second, in the most basic law, things that are grouped should be closer together, things that are separated should be separated, should be further. So as we look at this logo and navigation, you see that there's an entire group around that because it's our header, right? But within that, we have a subgroup of these three navigation elements. And if we look at how far apart those are, look at how far apart these are, we see that the navigation elements are actually further apart than the first navigation element in the logo. So that's like a crime. That's like, no, that is wrong, objectively. As you go through this website, this is the same thing here. These two options are really a subgroup, right? In terms of the hierarchy of their usefulness on the website versus the header which organizes them. And these options are further apart than the first option and the header for that. In this situation, another sub-nested group is all of this, everything under a header, so the content of your website. And we want to make sure that those are the same distance apart as the top navigation, because they are grouped. So this is kind of an exercise that allows you to go through your entire website and objectively decide where things should be positioned. It's also like super, super easy. I have printouts of Facebook. We can go through that and just look at how things are positioned, how they're grouped and separated, and decide what is important on this page and how things are done well. If we were to remake this, by the way, we could space this out further. We could drop this entire content section to show that it's separated from the entire header. There are a few things like that as you go through a website that will allow you to lay them out better. So that's grouping and separation. It's sort of, again, like looking at the relationships between people on a soap opera. Does nav 2 have anything to do with option 2? Does header have something to do with the logo? Are they related? How can I communicate? Cool. So, the science behind all of this is a psychology principle called Gestalt. It kind of says that the mind understands external stimuli as a whole rather than the sum of their parts. So as we're looking at, say, the display on the back of the shell, we first interpret that as, oh, look at that, really cool photo mural on the wall, not look at that one photo that's next to that other photo that's next to that other photo. When we interpret objects in our visual world, we're looking at wholes and how things are grouped together instead of the sum of their parts. And there's this German word called Prägnanz, or Prägnanz, or something like that. And it kind of goes more in depth on that. This is a German principle, was made all the way back then in lovely Germany. So there are several rules of Gestalt called the Gestalt Principles of Grouping, or just the Principles of Grouping. So the first one is proximity. It says that objects that are close to each other are grouped. Objects that are far away from each other are not grouped, they're separated. This is the element that goes into how we broke down this website. It's a very objective, science-rooted concept that explains why we're able to go through and identify something as good design. Another thing is similarity. So this could be color, it could be pattern, it's usually color, or some sort of like effect on top. But if, let's say, sorry guys, if the first two nav items are red and the third one is green, we might know that they're all one element in that their proximity is close, and that's why they're grouped. But based on the similarity principle, the Gestalt principle of grouping, we know that the third element, because it's green, is different, and that might be an active state. It might say that we're on that page right now. So you can see how these principles can be combined to communicate really, really advanced concepts, like these three options are related. They are the parts of our website, but one of them is active right now. Closure is the third principle of Gestalt, of grouping. It says that, which one was this? Closure, right. So it says that, this one's pretty easy to grasp, that if we have something that completes most of an object, we're able to tell what it is. So what is this?
Square.
Square, amazing. What about this? What's behind it? Circle. A circle, amazing. So the concept of closure says that if you can see enough identifying parts of an object, then you're able to identify that as an object. Why is it important? As we discussed with the example up here, we're able to see that that is creating a sort of form by the space created around it. It creates a sort of square or rectangular figure and allows you to really understand that content better. It says that that element is grouped to itself, right? It's grouped. All those words are related because it's in that formation. An example of a poor way to do this is if you've ever seen on a website where they might have a long header and they've like optimized it for mobile or something. And as you expand, it says, "Welcome to our site." That's shit. That's awful. Why is this awful? Because it doesn't establish any form. It doesn't communicate that this is one object. What we're seeing here is this, which is not a familiar form. If our was moved down here, we would have a more rectangular figure there that we can understand that. We're able to see that that's one complete element instead of just a bunch of words together. So trailing words is really awful. Don't do that if you can avoid it. All right, so that is closure. Closure also relates pretty heavily to aspect ratios. Use these. These are ratios that people have used on devices, on paintings, on everything since the dawn of time. Some of them are so common that every phone in existence is 16 by 9 right now, and monitors are 16 by 9. People are familiar with these shapes. 1.61, the golden ratio, is not like the crown jewel. There are other aspect ratios that people are familiar with and are able to respond to as a grouping element. So combining this idea of closure with aspect ratios allows you to do some really cool stuff. Like in the website Chris and I are making right now for Startup Shell, we've used the 5:3 ratio, which is really popular in Europe and other places. We've used it a lot to do the images and the text boxes and things that most people wouldn't think about, but just will come naturally to you as you consume the content because it's creating that closure combined with that familiar aspect ratio. So it's pretty cool. These are the rest of the principles of grouping. We went over proximity, similarity, and closure. Symmetry is pretty obvious. Reflect over a mirrored plane. That's the way people group things. Common fate. This one's pretty interesting, but not necessarily super applicable to layout design, more to interaction design. It says that if things have the same common fate, if they're going to the same place or are enduring the same kind of experience that will end the same way, they are grouped. So, for instance, if I'm scrolling on a website, by the way, a lot of this layout stuff is easier to communicate through websites, but can be applied to newspaper and print or drawings, logos, other types of design things. But web and mobile are kind of the easiest to communicate right now, interfaces. So common fate might be, as you're scrolling, there's this new hot thing called scroll jacking or things like that. And when an element on the page doesn't respond to that same common fate of, if I scroll, everything moves. When I'm scrolling, you've seen when an image stays there or locks. That says that this element is different from the other ones because it doesn't have the same common fate. If I drop these two at the same time, they have the same common fate. They're both headed to the ground. That allows us to group those two objects together. Continuity is kind of like, the way you would break the law of continuity is kind of like when you put a straw in water and you see it go straight and then it kind of goes like that. It goes over and up. That would be like breaking continuity. The rest of it's pretty straightforward. If an object is broken and continues, it is the same object. You're able to group two totally separate line segments because of this law of continuity, this mental, psychological, sciencey thing. Law of good Gestalt, I'm not super familiar with. It kind of says that in a mesh of objects together, if multiple objects have the same pattern, even though they might be grouped otherwise, those objects are together. And past experience is based on previous knowledge, I guess. So again, these are super powerful. This allows you to group and separate items. It sounds super basic, but when you get to layout design and you're thinking of how can we distinguish that we want people to click this, or that these two are related, and that this statistic is related to that video, you can look through these and see which tools of the brain you can use to kind of group things and separate. All right. So here's a quick example. Scott asked for an example, so I threw it in. My first week, so I worked at Venmo this summer. My first week on the team, this is what the app looked like. Kind of small, sorry. But we went in and, well, I guess one of my projects was we took like 10 minutes with one of the Android engineers. We went through and not consciously, but like just applied these principles of grouping to this newsfeed and ended up with something like this. Now, why is, yeah, I'll go through them. So why is this special? The first thing we did, well, there was not really an order, it was kind of all at once, but something we did was, we looked at the padding around the avatars. So for whatever reason, on top there was less space than on the left and on the bottom. But the bottom was kind of tricky because you have a fluid amount of content, and so there's not necessarily a way to lock in the bottom. Well, what we did was on that one, this is again padding and margins, right? Or proximity. If the avatar is closer to the top than the left, it says that maybe that first item is more related to the nav bar than it is to the rest of the content below it. So using this law of proximity, first of all, we spaced out, I mean, perfectly, like it's easy to do, you just use the same numbers. We spaced out the avatar perfectly from the content surrounding it, so the padding and the margins on each side were the same, and we made them circles. What is that related to? The fact that we switched it to circles, which law? Okay, enclosure. We made it so that we were kind of breaking that law of enclosure. If you think that this first one has a square for the avatar, and then a sort of rectangular layout on the rest of the text, that's creating a box around it. And remember how we drew that trailing word? It's the same kind of idea when the words break that rectangle. When on the first item, when the like button is below the square, it breaks that beautiful rectangle, that law of enclosure, and kind of like ruins the form. So by switching to a circle, it doesn't imply, like we're like anti-using that law. It doesn't imply the law of closure and enclosure around that. It kind of makes the circle a separate element from the rest of it. So you're able to view the avatar as one thing, and then the entire meta note as another, but then it's enclosed by those separating lines. So it still has this idea that this is one element, but it doesn't force you into that rectangle. Another thing we did here was we lightened the color of the like and comment buttons. So what this was doing is that they were, now I don't think this demonstrates it very well, but they were pretty dark. They were about the same color, slightly lighter, but pretty close to the same color as the rest of the content in that meta note. And what that did was, as you look through the page from here to here, these are about the same color, right? And so as you're browsing this news feed, you're not able to discern what's a note from the top and what's a note from the bottom. Well, sorry, not so much that, but it's harder to discern where something starts and stops by glancing at it. So what we did here, very simple, we lightened the color of the like and comment button, and now it's much, much, much easier to see the difference between this one and this one and this one and this one, right? That's the law of similarity, the fact that these are different in color from each other, and that's how we're able to separate them. There were a few other things we did, but they all, I promise you, everything, and now we're not sitting in the conference room like, maybe we should implement the law of proximity on this one. Like that doesn't happen. It's just kind of instinct at this point. But now that you know these tools, you can think about it in every single design you make. The same way we went through a mixed site on the board, we did on this. What is grouped? Is it the note to the person, or is it the note to the like? We decided that the entire meta part, the person, paid person, and here's what for, that was important as one chunk, and that the like and comment and the meta statistics underneath was another chunk. And so that's why we separated them that way and consciously brought them closer to each other for the other parts. All right. Yeah?
You kind of answer this, but how do you get these principles to become?
Design a lot. They're very objective, right? So what, like, that's what I was saying before. Like when you look at something and you're just like, oh, this is a little off. Like I thought I did it right. Like all the content's nice, the colors go well together. Like what's off about this design? A lot of it comes down to that space, like thinking about space in this way, using these Gestalt properties to group and separate. Like that's truly a lot of the time when it comes down to when I see like a bad design. So here are some of those bad designs. The reason I bring this up is not to shame anyone who uses these, but to kind of show you how it's really easy to break these down and like what's wrong with them. So this is another example I went over with Nick. This is like the absolute worst table in existence. It's so awful. What's bad about this? Well, first of all, this person decided to use a small sliver of paper instead of the entire sheet. But we've seen these. You're a camp counselor or something, and you've got 80 campers, and you've got their name and like their arrival time or like their allergies or some shit. And you're going down the page, and like the column repeats, right? The column repeats onto the other side because there's not enough content to fill up the entire page, so you might as well repeat the column. It's a common practice. What's really, really awful about this? Well, does anyone want to take a guess? Yeah. This one?
Yeah.
With this time? Yeah. Exactly. So what we want to do here is group this together, right? The activity with the time. And we want to group this side together. But what we do here is that, or what the crime is on this one, is that the time is right justified. So the reason that's done is because digits, whether it's a decimal or a time, they align better when it's to the right because if you have $50 versus $150, you're able to see that one is like further out with the same kind of decimal alignment. That's why people align numbers to the right often. But in this case, aligning to the right, according to the law of proximity, says that these two elements are together. And if you just glanced at this, that is 100% what you would think. And it's regardless of the fact that the headings are bold and whatever else, that's like what people think. And this is where shit goes down. Like when you're looking at this and you actually need that information, and you're halfway through the column, midway through the sheet, and you don't see the headers, and you just associate things together like that. And this is like, it has implications. It's not just bad design, it has implications. A reason someone might do this is, oh, well, one of the activities was really long. The title of that was long, and so we had to make space. And so why don't we just make all the columns the same size? That happens, right? So there are ways to get around that. This is not the answer. This is, I guess, using the law of enclosure, but not necessarily solving the idea of proximity, the fact that those two elements are still too close to each other. Again, similar to how we did the layout, those two elements are objectively wrong to be so close to each other. So one way to solve this is to separate them. It's pretty easy. So in this case, we've shrunk the column of the time and still kept the activity, although it looks kind of bad, we've kept it long enough to accommodate the longest activity title. But still, the space in between here, these two, are less than the space in between those two. And we're able to see that, again, still an ideal case. Like there are a lot of ways to improve this beyond, but it's just one really, really simple approach, like spacing them out, using that law of proximity, taking it to heart, and spacing them out correctly is an objectively better way to do things. All right, here's another crime. So this is a...
Wait, I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
So why wouldn't you just switch the time and the activity if the time has to be right justified so that the time...
That's a great idea. Yeah, totally. Like there are a lot of ways to do it. I was just showing how using the law of proximity might help. But yeah, I mean, that's a much better idea. Switching the time and the activity would solve that problem. Yeah. Great. Cool. So this is a hackathon's website. It doesn't matter who it is.
It matters.
No, I actually cropped out who it is. So what is so bad about this? There are a few things, but does anyone have any ideas? Yeah.
Looks like each row is kind of grouped together, so I would imply that some of this ones are paid more than other ones.
Okay.
It's like I'm grouping those as rows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other ideas?
This is the Firefox, and the technical is actually
Okay. Cool. Any other ideas? Yeah.
partners is like
Awesome. Good call. Okay. What's different sizes?
Yeah, full of themselves. So
Okay.
empty square is a lot bigger.
A lot bigger than T-squared. Yes. Yeah.
Response.
Good call. Good call. Any other ideas? Yeah.
It's like all one vertical column, and I use the left and right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
The ability to create like the look for all of them.
Awesome. Good call. So these are one more. Yeah.
Can't really bring attention to maybe like visual logo.
Okay. Right. Guys, these are like you're now like advanced web designers. Congrats. Like this is really what separates everything you just mentioned is spot on, and it's really what separates someone who can make a website and someone who can make a well-designed website. So we can address each of those. I don't remember what order, but one thing Matt said was that there's no sort of form around them. There's no structure to them on the outside. So thinking of the padding of the entire page, there's no padding. And by the way, each thing you mentioned, some of them might be stylistic choices, and some of that's okay. There are things that are objectively wrong, and some that are can be okay. And a lot of it comes down to the combination of them. So like I think even on the BitCamp website last year, we didn't necessarily have form around it, but some of the other things people brought up, like the spacing between each one, who said Firefox and Effective look like the same. Now the reason you're thinking that is because look at the space between Effective and Spotify. Like that's a lot of space. It's more than the space between the Firefox logo and Effective. It's also, yeah. So, and since they're the only two on the line, we use that schema that a round logo plus text equals logo as a whole. And since it's not separated, there's nothing to break that schema. So yes, that's objectively wrong. You should not do that. Especially considering how tight down here that some of these are. These aren't communicating that they're separate. Now we know that they're separate because of the law of similarity. They're different colors. There's three of them. That's not normal. It doesn't fit our schema of what a logo is. But we're not necessarily able to separate them as different things. We see that as a row. Who said row? That was spot on. We see rows. Like we want to appreciate the individual companies that are putting their heart and soul into sponsoring this by writing a check. So we want to separate them enough that people can digest each logo as one bit of content and not necessarily as a row of sponsors. And so one way to do that is by putting more space in between them. It's not about the content itself. The colors look fine. The logos are well designed, but it's the space in between them. There were a lot of other really good ideas. I think you're, again, spot on. And so I think I put in, all right, we'll get to a nicely designed venture kit later that shows how, this is, by the way, one of the hardest things to do in web design. How do you organize pieces of content of different size? It's like a time-old problem. But we can look at ways that it's done better. So while we're at it, talking about white space, this is like trendy designers' favorite thing to like throw out, but it's really kind of trash, right? Like white space isn't important. It's not about like how much white space you have. It's really about the relationship between an element and its surroundings, right? The space itself, not necessarily that it's white or that it's we need more of it. That's not the issue. It's really that like for instance, if this entire wall had white on it, that wouldn't really help this. Versus there are things like size that come into play. I just want to say like white space is not necessarily the thing you should focus on. It's part of that interaction between content and space. More white space is you'll sound like an idiot. Don't say it. You're like that client from hell.net website. So perfection. What's really cool about design is that you're able to create truly perfect things. Things that are balanced and are beautifully aspect ratioed out. And this is something I really enjoy in design. There are a lot of things like style and interaction and things like that kind of make good and bad designers. But I think like in certain elements of designing, you can actually achieve perfection on a certain element by the way you use the space. So here's some examples. Oh yeah, this is why being a designer sucks. As you try to achieve that perfection, that objective perfection, you get into this. So welcome to Illustrator. So this is a site that Chris and I have been designing. It's not perfect in a lot of ways, but what I do think achieves like that nice like balance is using the space nicely. We're able to see really well what content is grouped together, what content is separated, what is calling our attention, what we should click on, the hierarchy. It's all using these types of skills to create the content on the page. This is an app I made a long time ago, and I think what's nice about it is it uses, as highlighted here, it uses these like consistent spacing ideas to not only like increase the order on the page, but really show like what is clickable, what is together, what is part of one element, what is not. I think that's really cool, and I only bring this one up because it's the only one I mapped out with those cool lines, so it's kind of cool. This is the huge website. Jackson and I were just admiring this the other day. This is a part of their footer. It's such a basic element, but just the way that, like, even though this is the highlighted one, it's highlighted by, anyone want to shout it out? Closure and like the law of similarity. So this is separate because it is pink. It's the same because of the rest of the content on it is similar. And it creates this nice square around it. And even though the rest of these don't have any physical square around it, you still feel that space. You feel that like that peace and balance when you look at this design, and I think it's pretty beautiful. This is Medium, and the first article I wrote on Medium, and the Medium used to do a really good job of everything I've been talking about. And as the product expanded, the product got more complex, and now they don't do it as well. But in terms of old school Medium, it was so beautiful. The way they've established hierarchy with the different kinds of elements, the space between each paragraph, and on the sides, and the aspect ratio of the image, like everything really just came together in Medium's very first initial design. What they were saying with their first platform was, this is the first writing platform that focuses on content. And that was really special. And they nailed it, and fuck Medium for expanding too fast. No, I still read on Medium. I like it a lot, but they used to be perfect. All right, so here's some things you can work on to actually get good at this. So this is the Facebook event for this talk. I printed some of these out. You can pass them around. If anyone feels inclined, grab a sheet, take out a marker or pencil or whatever, and just make boxes around things. Make boxes around what elements are grouped. Make those nested boxes. You will get better at this. I promise. By just identifying this is a very, very complex website right here. We're looking at tons of information, something that we use every day, and are able to find exactly what we need at any given time. You don't need to take one. I won't feel bad, but if you feel so inclined. Like this is saying where an event is, the time, the people who are going, the most important people who are going, the description. It has so much going on, and we're able to navigate that by looking at the grouping and separation of this website. And once you look at it analytically, I don't think Facebook's necessarily a visually beautiful website, but in terms of the way they functionally use this idea of like grouping and separation, they're able to communicate very complex things with ease to you. This is also an amazing article that goes into more depth on the Gestalt Principles I was talking about. It's called Gestalt Principles in Natural Interactions. And I can share this link around after. I think it's an awesome link, and repeats a lot of what I said, but goes into more depth. I think that's my last slide. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming out. So I'm here all night. If you want to talk like nerdy design stuff with me, let's do it. If there are any questions right now, I can take them. But otherwise, go out there and be an awesome designer. Any questions? Stuff you want to talk about? Dave.
I actually don't know.
Can you speak up? Okay. You mean like I have a website. I don't really have a product yet, but I want a website. So I'm gonna have like a picture of an iPhone and like a catchy header and like a sign-up box. So okay, as it relates to this, something they do pretty well is that, I mean, is there something you, like specific you want to talk about? We could talk about splash pages for hours, but like. Oh, okay. So the traditional splash page, there's an amazing thing by Visual Idiot, Visual Idiot app. Okay, yeah, I think this is a really funny website. So what these websites do is they're communicating like a very simple concept about their app, right? This is like website everyone's seen. I mean, the content is one thing. Let's not talk about that as per the theme of my talk. But the way they've kind of laid out these pages, if anything to note, a lot of them use this like half and half, right? They have like a very visual thing on one side and a like description or whatever on the other side. That, if anything, is using like some of these laws of proximity. It's saying that like all the description content together is important together. The outrageous yet vague claim is not only related to the, just to dissect this, it's not only related to the iPhone app on the left, it's related to the content below by the proximity of it. In fact, all of that content together is related to each other, right? They want you to read this and then click, while this visual stimulus helps you on the side. I mean, we could tear this apart in terms of like the marketing side of these things, but in terms of the space, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Now that you know these principles, like it's so easy, right, to like look at these and see why they're organized that way. And it's also easy to look at why something is off on a different website. But yeah, that's what I got to say about these. Cool. Any other questions? Or just like things you find interesting or want to investigate more?
What are some of your favorite websites?
Some of my favorite websites? Whoa.
So do you have a top 30? Come on, what's your top 30?
There's my top 30?
What's your favorite Maryland website?
Maryland website. I mean, I don't know. Here, why don't we take a preview at the website Chris and I are releasing tonight. This is going to be one of my favorite websites ever. Look, I'm in terminal. Chris, yeah, there's a lot you can say about that. I promise, just by like spacing things out, everyone would be able to. Oh fuck. Okay, we're not totally responsive yet. I'm sorry.
Wow, trailing.
I know. Okay, so it's not done. Right? But anyway. Yeah, I know. All right, so I mean, we could go through this website and look at like how things are grouped together. I think what Chris and I and Luis is also working on this with us. What we tried to really do with this was have a lot of consistency between the website. This is the first startup shell website that's actually going to communicate a fair amount of content. And this was the about page I was talking about before. So we wanted to be able to be like more consistent about how we were presenting this content as opposed to how we had done it previously, which was kind of haphazard. But in terms of the way this is done, it's all in a really nice grid. And just the way things are organized, again, all the aspect ratios are on point. The colors, we've stayed. A note on color as it relates to this. This is not related to space, but using that law of proximity, or of similarity, when using color, I think a lot of people go overboard in terms of the colors in their website. This website is created with like 3 colors, gray, well, and white. So gray, light gray, and red. And the way we've done that, we've reserved red for only super important things, whether it's a link, whether it's a gorgeous logo, or again, clickable things. That's what we've reserved red for, because we understand this law of similarity, that if things are similar, they're perceived as the same. Wonderful. But for instance, on this community section, right? We have these 2 pieces of text, which are both gray or black, oh, sorry, this is red. projector doesn't replicate colors great. But so we're using the law of proximity to communicate here that this content is grouped as one. This should be red. It is not the header. It is the content of that section. But we've used the law of similarity to say that since this is red, it is different from the other content, and we only need one color to say that. We didn't do it with any fancy schmancy stuff. We've used a color and simple spacing to communicate this complex idea, right? It's more than just content. So you can go through the website and see, oh, fuckers. Why do you keep changing the picture? Jesus. Doesn't even work well there. All right, so this is our events website. We've used we've used a lot of different spacing to communicate that, like, for instance, if the spacing had been too close here, this member forum 010 and the date might have related to this picture down here, which is related to a totally different event. So with very simple spacing, we've made, we've shown that this is the association we're creating between the content, the text, and the picture. We've also shown that it's clickable with the colors, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, again, like a pretty basic application. This is, once we're done making it responsive and pushing it out, it's going to be, I think, one of the best websites we've made together, our team. I'm really excited about it. So yeah, that's kind of how these laws are being applied here. Yeah. To what? Oh, which one, man? Back. Which one? Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah. The reasoning there. Yeah. Yeah. So the reasoning there. I've never done a layout like this before. Usually my stuff is like the stuff I end up making is like more similar, like kind of more boxy and aligned. The reason we did this is because we wanted to feature the pictures really big. But if, say, it was a quad system, it might be hard to discern what relates to what. Does this text relate to the thing above it, or does it relate to the thing to the right of it? And so what we've done here is we've done, I think, columns of like on a 12 grid, it's like 5 and 7. So it's just off alignment in the middle. And what that does is it, like, there is no question which bit of content is associated with which picture, versus the fact that you might associate things vertically instead of horizontally. So that's why that decision was made. There's tons of ways you could do it. You could say that, I mean, again, if you, like, pretty much every decision you could make in terms of how you would separate or group them could be broken down into those laws, right? Whether, like, I mean, you could do, like, weird, like, hipster shit with, like, scrolling. You know, if you were scrolling down the page and one of, like, 2 boxes were moving at the same rate and the other wasn't, like, that would show you that those are grouped. That's the law of common fate. You could use separation. You could, you know, separate them with margins, as you suggested just now. You could do it with color. You could, you know, make all the text green and the picture green, or something like that. You could do it with closure. You could put a box around it, a border. Even if it wasn't aligned, yeah, I could put a border around this. You know, that went like up and around and down and over and up and around. I could do that, and it would show that it was grouped, and it would break all the other shit, because that's what that enclosure is communicating. Now, enclosure, by the way, is different from closure. The law of closure is more like that box that's not completed or covered, that you're able to process shapes when you don't see all of it. Enclosure says that things are grouped because they're enclosed by something. Similar but different. So there are tons of ways, but I guarantee you could associate every, like, common web design decision to some of these psychological principles.
So I want to understand like the process better. Let's use the site, for example, or you know, something else, but would you, like, you know, mock this up and say we're having a grid of 5 and 7? Like, what's your process for having?
Yeah. So let's see. When I design differently from most web designers. Like, a lot of people say, like, oh, sketch, like, fuck yeah, sketch things out, and like, you know, like, wireframe it and, like, put hours into, like, drawing it on a grid, like, waste of time. So I hop right into Illustrator. I use the same 12-column grid in most of my sites, at least to start, and then you can go responsive, bigger, smaller. But the reason I started Illustrator immediately with the grid system is because I'm constantly thinking about like these types of things and that concept of perfection. Like when I make a box, I want it to be square. Like I can't design by drawing a box this professionally. I like seeing it perfect as an 80 by 80 pixel box or whatever. I like seeing it perfectly gridded up. And that's really important to me. And I'm able to iterate faster within Illustrator because it allows me to organize like all my tools that way around this idea of like using things perfectly. And so, yeah, like in terms of process, that's a little different from what most people do, I think. Most people will like have an idea of what they want when they go into Illustrator, whereas I iterate within Illustrator because it allows me to be to design like that. But I mean, further than that, like as it relates to the talk, I mean, there's a, we could go through like actually the process of making. And I recorded it. Oh, fuck yeah. Okay.
Do you want to show the actual mock-ups to it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So this is kind of cool. So I've been recording a lot of the stuff I make. Is this it? Which is really fun because it allows me to answer your question. So this should be sped up. Oh no, this is the 1 hour one. Okay. It might 9 seconds. This isn't going to be it. Oh, okay. So this is kind of answering your question. Yeah, I know. So you can. Okay, that was it. So that was session 1. Much faster than an hour and 45 minutes. But yeah. So like, I can't really reference. Oh, here. This will be better. All right. So you can kind of look at you know how I'm using these tools. Yeah. What were you asking?
I said, how many years?
With Illustrator, my senior year of high school, we started using a newspaper. By the way, newspaper, was anyone on their newspaper team in high school? Yeah. Newspaper teaches you all of this stuff. It's like the most layout designy art, right? It is like newspaper. That's where I learned this. In newspaper, as you lay things out, there's like this rule that you have to be able to fit an entire story in a rectangle. And that's why you don't see articles that like start with a picture here and then like go off to the side and like down and there's another article there, because they should all fit in a rectangle. So that like from the start of like when I use like design tools, I was taught this stuff. You can look at newspapers or like magazine online publications as like a great inspiration for layout. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Illustrator uses vector. That means that every object on the page is created with paths and math. And it's infinitely scalable, and it's awesome. This is the part where I spend a lot of time trying to find like a really dramatic picture that Sam took. It ends up being Ayana. Hey, Ayana. Okay, so you just asked why Illustrator. Okay, so Illustrator versus Photoshop, it's an endless conversation. The reason I use Illustrator is because it's vector. It allows. Yeah. So generally, first of all, the big difference between the two, again, Illustrator is vector. Photoshop uses pixels, which are a grid of colored blocks, right? And so inherently, like using things that are scalable and manipulable, like is better for web design, in my opinion. The main argument going for Photoshop is the extensive support there is. Like, for whatever reason, Photoshop is more popular for web design. So there's a lot of great like plugins and other tools for Photoshop. It's also pixel perfect, which is a ridiculous excuse that a lot of people make. Like, oh, Photoshop is exactly as it'll appear on my screen. Like, nope, you got to code it. Like, it's not going to look like that. So I think that's totally not reasonable. Illustrator, if anything, is much closer to how code works, because you're able to look at not just pixels on a flat page, but you're able to see dimensions of the objects and the bounding boxes around them. And using that as like the core of how you design is, I think, better to lead into putting it in code. And it also like reinforces a lot of like my aesthetic of like this perfection idea, like things being aligned and gridded properly. And I think that's better doing in Illustrator. Photoshop is great if you're used to it. There's also like Sketch, which Brendan over here uses, and a lot of other tools. But Illustrator is the shit. Try it out. Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of leads to questions, which was, when you choose like your canvas size and you design responsibly, and what's really help you do that effectively, or how do you address the response?
My workflow is usually I design for desktop with mobile in mind. So luckily, a lot of the shit I make is like super minimal, and it translates to mobile better than things that are more complex. Straightforward. So I don't usually make mobile mockups unless there's like a reason to, that the experience is different. It's probably a bad thing. I should probably make them. It's probably good practice to do. But it works out, like, for whatever reason, going to mobile from the desktop version is easier for me and the people I'm working with in code than with mockups. Although recently, like, Jackson requested a mobile mockup for me for a site we're working on. So, like, I make them sometimes, especially if it helps other people. But it just so happens that, for whatever reason, I like doing it in code instead of in Illustrator.
And that's not the case all the time. Some people, it's common practice to actually start from mobile first.
Mobile first, yeah.
Mobile first design is a very common approach.
Yeah.
Start from mobile first and you work your way up. And we did this site starting from desktop and working our way down.
It's good to think about how your users are consuming it. You wouldn't design a map as the web app first and then go to like a native app design from that. You'd start with the native app and maybe make a website, maybe. But like we know that for whatever reason, most of the people using the Startup Show website are going to be on desktop. Even though like in a year that probably won't be the case. So yeah, well, I guess that's the end. But that's how I made it.
So this is a blueprint, right? You're just creating a blueprint.
Yes, this is not the website. Yeah, so the workflow of a designer, or at least me, is make things in Illustrator, get them the way I want them, code them up. So, yeah. That is a good answer. Cool. Any other questions or like cool topics you want to talk about? What time is it? Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on designing straight in the browser?
Designing the browser is a dumb idea. All right, next question. No, so the reason I say that, I actually have a lot of thoughts on this, and Google's and I talk about this a lot. When you code, you can't be as rapid as, well, for me, right? Like for you, you could probably design in HTML and CSS much faster than in Illustrator, because you're more familiar with those tools. For me, and if you were to start from zero on both right now, you would be faster designing mockups and then coding than iteratively coding. The reason is, when you design, it has this idea of like direct manipulation. When I move things, it responds immediately. In code, you don't have that. Changing the color of something might take 6 lines of code in a weird case. And so, well, I mean, if they're like multiple classes and things like so versus in Illustrator where it's not. So that's kind of the reason. There are a lot of people thinking about this as like, why are people not iterating in code more, and designing with code? This dude that like my entire house is obsessed with, and Victor, it's all about like showing you how the output is changed by every move you make in code. If people keep going down that line of making tools that help communicate what your code is doing, then coding will be faster than designing. It's just a matter of time. Actually, I don't know, maybe. But there is hope, right? But yeah, that's the reason. I like seeing the changes, and my familiarity with the software, with Illustrator, allows me to iterate faster. Like I don't go in and design it and it's done. I change things constantly in the mock-ups themselves. And hopefully you are too, constantly improving. Sweet. Any other questions? Awesome. Did anyone end up like doing the Facebook thing? Yeah? Was it helpful?
Yeah.
Yay. Cool. You are now a much better designer, and I promise when you're ready to make your next interface, it will be awesome. All right. I guess that's it. I'm like probably going to be here all night if you want to like talk about stuff or if you need advice on your designs. Thanks, guys.